North Atlantic, April 1943. The ocean was black as oil and twice as cold. Wave tops broke white in the utter darkness, and somewhere beneath that heaving, indifferent surface, death was circling. Aboard the destroyer escort USS Eldridge, Petty Officer 2nd Class Vincent Vinnie Duca sat hunched in front of a radar scope in a compartment barely larger than a closet, watching the green blips pulse across the screen like faint heartbeats. The convoy, HX-237, stretched out for miles behind them, 47 vulnerable merchant ships carrying the lifeblood of the war, fuel, ammunition, and food to a besieged Britain. They were slow, they were fat, and they were impossibly precious. The destroyer's sonar operator had reported a possible contact an hour ago, but it had faded into the vast, noisy chaos of the ocean. Standard procedure said, log it and move on. U-boats were ghosts. They appeared, they vanished. You couldn't chase every shadow. But Vinnie wasn't watching the sonar readout. He wasn't even really watching his own radar screen. He was listening. Most radar operators were trained to watch the screen for visual blips. Vinnie listened to the signal return, the raw audio feed that came through his headphones, translating the electromagnetic echoes into a language of sound, pulses, rhythms, and patterns. To everyone else, it was just static. To Vinnie, it was the voice of the ocean. And right now, that voice was saying something was terribly wrong. The signal return from a patch of ocean 3 miles to the northwest wasn't behaving like open water. It had a texture, a slight, almost imperceptible variance in the interval between the pulses, a fluttering quality that didn't match the surrounding wave patterns. Vinnie had heard it once before, 6 months ago off the coast of Iceland, right before a wolfpack had surfaced and torn the heart out of a convoy. He'd reported it then. No one had believed him. The U-boats had struck 20 minutes later. This time, Vinnie didn't wait for permission. He yanked off his headphones and ran for the bridge. The officer of the deck, Lieutenant Commander Paul Garrison, looked up from the chart table, his face a mask of irritation as the hatch flew open. Duca, you're supposed to be on station. Sir, we have multiple contacts, Vinnie said, his voice tight with urgency. Northwest sector, range 15,000 yards. Garrison frowned, glancing at the sonar repeater. Sonar shows nothing. I'm not reading sonar, sir. I'm reading the radar audio return. It's showing mass displacement inconsistent with surface wave action. Garrison stared at him, dumbfounded. The idea was absurd on its face. Radar waves bounced off the surface. They didn't penetrate water. You're telling me you can hear submarines on radar? Vinnie met his commander's eyes without flinching. Yes, sir. I can. And if we don't act in the next 10 minutes, this convoy is going to lose a dozen ships. Garrison could have dismissed him. He could have ordered him back to his station. He could have followed protocol, which stated unequivocally that what Vinnie was describing was impossible. But Paul Garrison had been in the North Atlantic long enough to know that the ocean didn't follow manuals, and he had seen the burning wreckage after the Iceland convoy, a disaster that had begun with this same sailor making the same impossible claim. Garrison looked at the clock, at the chart, at the vast, dark ocean outside. He thought about the 200 men who had died at Iceland. And then he made a decision that would defy the rulebook. All right, Duca, he said, turning to the helm. Come to heading 320. Flank speed. Sound general quarters. As the piercing shriek of the alarm wailed through the ship and men scrambled to their battle stations, Vinnie returned to his radar set and put the headphones back on. The pattern was still there, stronger now, clearer. He closed his eyes and listened to the shape of the ocean, and in those sounds, in the subtle spaces between the pulses, he could hear them. 3 U-boats, running submerged, positioning for attack. What Vinnie Duca did in the next 40 minutes would not only save convoy HX-237, but would introduce a completely new, and seemingly impossible, method of submarine detection. One that relied not on sonar, not on visual contact, not on luck, but on something no one had thought possible, the ability to hear what couldn't be seen, and to read the ocean not with eyes or instruments, but with the power of the human mind's pattern recognition, turned into a weapon. Vincent Duca grew up in South Philadelphia in a neighborhood where every block had 3 churches, 2 bakeries, and 1 bookie. His father, Sal, was a machinist at the sprawling Philadelphia Navy Yard. His mother, Angela, sang in the church choir and ran the household with the precision of a drill sergeant. Vinnie was the middle child of 5, quieter than his boisterous brothers, less social than his sisters. As a kid, he spent countless hours in the basement while his father, a man who tinkered constantly, worked on engines and household appliances. While other boys were playing stickball in the street, Vinnie was listening to the symphony of the sounds of metal on metal, the complex rhythms of lathes, drills, and presses. He quickly learned to identify tools, and then problems, by their sound alone. A drill bit hitting hardened steel sounded sharp and clean, hitting softer aluminum was a duller bite. A loose bearing in an electric motor had a particular, rhythmic rattle. A cracked flywheel in an engine hummed at just the wrong frequency. His father noticed. "You got a good ear, Vincent. Better than good." By the time Vinnie was 12, he could diagnose mechanical problems in his neighborhood without even looking at them. The icebox compressor down the street was failing. He could hear the strain in its hum from his front stoop. The neighbor's car had a bent valve. He recognized the uneven tick of the engine as it drove past. The trolley on Market Street had a wheel bearing that was about to seize. He heard the high-pitched squeal that no one else seemed to notice. People thought it was a party trick, a strange but harmless quirk. Vinnie just thought everyone could do it. He didn't realize he possessed a rare gift, an exceptional, almost unconscious, ability for auditory pattern recognition. When the war came, Vinnie enlisted in the Navy in early 1942. He was 19, skinny, and, by his own admission, terrible at marching. But during the technical aptitude testing, something caught the examiner's attention. They put Vinnie in a room with a dozen different engine recordings playing simultaneously and asked him to identify each one by make and model. He got them all. Then they played recordings of specific mechanical failures, a subtle misfire in one cylinder, a fractional difference in rotational speed, a worn gear. Vinnie identified every single one. The examiner made a note that would change the course of Vinnie's life, and the course of the war in the Atlantic: exceptional auditory pattern recognition. They didn't send him to be a machinist like his father. They sent him to the new, highly secret world of radar school. In 1942, radar was still new, almost experimental technology, a world of arcane science that felt like magic to most sailors. Operators were trained to do one thing: watch the screen. They learned to interpret the visual blips, the faint green ghosts that represented ships or planes. But the equipment also produced a raw audio signal, a direct sonic translation of the returning electromagnetic pulse. To most operators, this audio feed was a useless distraction, a chaotic cacophony of static and beeps that they either turned off or ignored. But to Vinnie Duca, it was fascinating. It was a language waiting to be learned. During his training, he started keeping his headphones on, listening intently to the audio feed while watching the scope. He quickly began to notice that different objects produced distinct and consistent sound signatures. An aircraft, small and fast, had a sharp, quick, high-pitched return. A large surface ship had a slower, heavier, more resonant pulse. A weather front produced a scattered, hissing, chaotic pattern. But there were other sounds, too, subtle variations in the rhythm and texture of the pulses that didn't correspond to anything in the training manual. Vinnie started keeping a detailed notebook. He'd try to sketch the waveforms, he'd use musical terms to describe the audio textures, and he'd meticulously catalog the patterns. His instructors thought he was eccentric but harmless. One of them, however, a veteran chief petty officer named Raymond Cass, took an interest. He saw in Vinnie not an oddball, but a true technician trying to understand the machine on a deeper level. "What are you hearing, Duca?" he asked one day. Vinnie struggled to explain. "It's like, every object has a voice, Chief. The radar bounces off it and the echo comes back different. I can hear the shape of things." Cass, a man who had been in the Navy for 22 years, had learned that the best sailors weren't always the ones who followed the book. They were the ones who understood the sea, and their ships, in ways the book couldn't teach. "Keep at it," he said. The war is going to need people who can see what others miss, or hear it. Vinnie graduated in the top 5% of his class and, in late 1942, was assigned to the USS Eldridge, a brand-new Cannon-class destroyer escort. The Eldridge was a small, fast, no-frills warship, a vessel built for one grim purpose: to hunt and kill German submarines. By April 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached its bloody, desperate peak. Admiral Karl Donetz's U-boat wolfpacks were sinking Allied ships faster than they could be replaced. The convoys were the fragile lifeline between the industrial might of America and the besieged island of Great Britain, and every single crossing was a deadly gamble. The Eldridge was assigned to the escort screen for Convoy HX-237, a sprawling collection of 47 merchant vessels carrying the critical supplies of war. The convoy had left New York on April 12 and was now 5 days into its perilous crossing. They were approaching the most dangerous stretch of the entire ocean, a vast, 1,000-kilometer-wide dead zone in the middle of the Atlantic where land-based air cover from Newfoundland or Iceland couldn't reach. The sailors called it the Black Pit. It was a place where the U-boats, free from the threat of aerial attack, could hunt with impunity. Vinnie had been on radar watch for 6 hours straight. His eyes were dry from staring at the hypnotic green sweep of the scope, his back ached from the cramped stool, but his ears were sharp. And that's when he first heard it. The audio return from the northwest sector had a quality he'd noticed once before. A slight, almost inaudible stuttering in the pulse interval, a subtle flutter in the rhythm, as if something large and unseen was disturbing the surface water from below. It was not enough to create a visual blip on the screen. It was not enough to register on the ship's sonar. But it was enough to change the acoustic signature of the radar's echo. Vinnie pulled out his worn notebook and compared the pattern he was hearing to the frantic sketches he had made after the disastrous Iceland convoy months earlier. It matched. He felt his stomach tighten into a cold knot. He remembered what had happened at Iceland with sickening clarity. He had reported the anomalous radar audio to the watch officer. The officer, a by-the-book lieutenant, had glanced at the empty radar scope, seen nothing, checked the silent sonar, and dismissed Vinnie's report as fatigue or an overactive imagination. 20 minutes later, 3 U-boats had surfaced in perfect coordination and launched a devastating torpedo attack. 4 ships had sunk in a matter of minutes. 200 men had died, swallowed by the freezing, oil-slicked water. Vinnie had filed a formal report afterward, describing in detail what he had heard, a report that was noted and then officially ignored. Radar could not detect submerged submarines. Everyone knew that. But Vinnie knew what he had heard. And now, he was hearing it again. In that moment, he made a decision that would either save the convoy or end his naval career. He chose not to follow the chain of command. He chose to act. The USS Eldridge raced northwest at 24 knots, a greyhound unleashed into the darkness, every man aboard tense and silent. Vinnie was back at his radar station, headphones clamped over his ears, his eyes closed. He wasn't watching the scope anymore, he was listening to the language of the ocean. The audio feed was a constant, rhythmic pulse, but in one sector, the pattern stuttered. It was like listening to a heartbeat with a dangerous, irregular beat. He adjusted the gain, narrowing the focus, and the irregularity sharpened. He could now hear 3 distinct sources, 3 points where the ocean's surface wasn't behaving the way it should. 1 contact, bearing 335, range 14,000 yards, he reported into the intercom, his voice calm and professional. 2nd contact, bearing 342, range 15,500 yards. 3rd contact, bearing 328, range 13,000 yards. On the bridge, Lieutenant Commander Garrison marked the positions on the chart. They formed a perfect, predatory triangle, a classic wolfpack formation, designed to bracket a convoy and attack from multiple angles simultaneously. If he's right, the XO, Lieutenant Harris muttered, they're setting up for a coordinated strike. A few minutes later, the radio crackled. One of the other destroyers, the USS Brennan, reported a faint but definite sonar contact, almost exactly where Vinnie had placed his first target. Duca had been right. Garrison keyed the intercom. Duca, you still have them? Yes, sir. All three. They're moving. Adjusting formation. Garrison didn't waste time. All escorts. Weapons free. Execute operation observant. The Eldridge and 2 other destroyer escorts surged forward in a coordinated attack pattern. Vinnie stayed glued to his headphones, becoming the eyes of the task force, calling out the submarine's movements as he heard their turbulence patterns shift in the audio feed. "They know we're coming," he said into the intercom. "They're diving deeper. Bearing 335 contact is moving east, fast." Garrison relayed the information. The Brennan adjusted its course and launched a pattern of depth charges. Seconds later, massive plumes of water erupted from the dark ocean, a series of colossal, liquid explosions. Vinnie listened. The audio signature from that bearing had changed. It was now chaotic, scattered. "Second contact is surfacing, bearing 342. On the horizon, a dark, sleek shape broke through the water. A U-boat, likely damaged by the nearby explosions, was attempting to escape on the surface. The Eldridge's 5-inch gun swung toward it and opened fire. The third shell struck the conning tower, and the U-boat listed, men scrambling on its deck before it slipped beneath the waves, trailing oil and debris. "Third contact is diving," Vinnie reported, "moving southwest, fast." The third destroyer, the USS Thomas, raced toward the contact and launched its Hedgehog mortars. The projectiles arced through the air and splashed into the water. Moments later, a series of deep, underwater explosions lit the ocean from below. Vinnie heard the contact's signature completely disintegrate. "Got him," he said quietly. On the bridge of the Eldridge, there was a moment of stunned silence, then controlled chaos as Garrison barked orders, coordinating the search for survivors and ensuring the convoy continued its evasive maneuvers. He then grabbed the intercom. "Duca, report to the bridge." When Vinnie climbed the ladder, his legs still shaking from adrenaline, every officer turned to look at him. Garrison walked over, his face unreadable. "Duca, how did you know?" Vinnie swallowed. "I didn't know, sir. I just heard something that didn't fit. And I'd heard it before." The lieutenant commander nodded slowly. "You saved this convoy. You know that, right?" The XO, Lieutenant Harris, spoke up. "Sir, with respect, we need to understand what he's doing. If this is repeatable, if other operators can learn it, we could change how we hunt submarines." Garrison's after-action report, detailing the impossible detection method, reached Admiral Royal Ingersoll, the Commander-in-Chief of the Atlantic Fleet, within a week. At first, it was met with deep skepticism. The idea that radar, a surface search tool, could detect submerged objects sounded like science fiction. But the results were undeniable. 3 U-boats engaged, 2 confirmed kills, 1 probable. Convoy HX-237 had arrived in Liverpool without losing a single ship. Admiral Ingersoll, a man more interested in results than in dogma, ordered a full investigation. A team of top civilian scientists and naval engineers from the Navy's Bureau of Ships traveled to Boston, where the Eldridge had put in for resupply, to interview Petty Officer Duca. They brought oscilloscopes, high-fidelity recording equipment, and stacks of notebooks. For 3 days, they put Vinnie through a battery of rigorous tests. They played him dozens of previously recorded radar audio returns and asked him to identify any anomalies. They simulated submarine contacts using complex mathematical models and asked him to find them in the noise. They challenged him, again and again, to explain what he was hearing in technical, scientific terms. Vinnie struggled with the explanations. He didn't have the vocabulary of a physicist. But he could demonstrate. Every time they played a recording that contained the subtle signature of a submerged vessel, he identified it. When they mixed it with false signals, he filtered them out. His accuracy rate was a staggering 87%. Dr. Harold Fisk, a brilliant physicist from MIT who was leading the team, finally sat down with Vinnie in the ship's wardroom. "Mr. Duca," he said, "what you're doing shouldn't be possible according to the textbooks, but it is. You're detecting hydrodynamic disturbances through reflected electromagnetic radiation. The human ear can't process that data consciously, but your brain is recognizing patterns in the audio feed that correspond to real physical phenomena. Vinnie nodded, not entirely following. Can other people learn it? Dr. Fisk hesitated. Maybe. Pattern recognition is partly innate, partly trained. You have an exceptional auditory processing capability. But with the right training protocol, we might be able to teach others to recognize the most obvious signatures. Not everyone will have your sensitivity, but even a partial application of this technique could be invaluable. The Navy moved with a speed that reflected the desperation of the Atlantic War. By June of 1943, Vinnie Duca was reassigned from combat duty to the Anti-Submarine Warfare Training Center in Key West, Florida. His new job was to work directly with Dr. Fisk's team of scientists to reverse engineer his own brain, to take his intuitive, almost subconscious talent and turn it into a teachable, repeatable military doctrine. They called the top-secret program Acoustic Radar Analysis, or ARA. It was one of the most unconventional training programs of the entire war. Vinnie, now a chief petty officer, stood in front of classrooms of young radar operators, trying to explain the unexplainable. He couldn't teach them the physics, but he could teach them to listen, to recognize the subtle flutter in the audio return, to identify the signature of a U-boat's wake shadow on the surface. Over the next 6 months, Vinnie trained 43 radar operators in the ARA technique. The results were mixed. Some sailors, like Vinnie, had the ear for it and picked it up almost immediately. Others listened to the same signals and heard nothing but static. But enough of them showed a clear proficiency that the Navy began to deploy these specially trained ARA operators on destroyer escorts throughout the Atlantic. The results were dramatic and immediate. Between July and December of 1943, ships with ARA-trained operators detected 27 U-boats that their primary sonar systems had completely missed. 14 of those contacts resulted in confirmed kills or crippling damage. The tide in the Battle of the Atlantic was turning, and ARA was a key, secret part of that shift. German submarine commanders, who had once hunted with impunity, now reported being detected and attacked with a speed and accuracy they couldn't explain. They began to avoid areas where they suspected ARA-equipped ships were operating, their hunting grounds shrinking. By early 1944, the technique had been refined and fully integrated with the other new anti-submarine technologies like Huff-Duff and the Hedgehog mortar. Sonar remained the primary detection method, but acoustic radar analysis provided a vital, additional layer of defense, a secret weapon that could catch the U-boats in the gaps where they thought they were safest. Admiral Ingersoll, in a classified letter, personally commended Vinnie for his contribution. "Your innovation has saved lives and ships," he wrote. "You have contributed materially to the success of the Atlantic campaign." But Vinnie Duca never received a medal. His technique was deemed too classified, too strange and revolutionary to publicize. The Navy worried that if Germany ever learned how it worked, they might develop countermeasures or, worse, try to replicate it. So Vinnie's name never appeared in any press releases or official histories. He was a ghost, a secret weapon whose very existence was denied. When the war ended, Chief Petty Officer Vincent Duca went home to Philadelphia. He returned to the Navy Yard, not as a sailor, but as a civilian machinist, the same job his father had held. He married, had a family, and for 30 years, he lived a quiet, unassuming life. He never talked about what he'd done during the war. His contribution was locked away in top-secret files, a ghost in the archives. In 1976, the Navy finally declassified portions of the ARA program. A graduate student from the Naval War College, a young woman named Patricia Holloway, came across Vinnie's name in a footnote of a declassified report and was fascinated. She tracked him down. He was 53 years old, retired, spending his days fixing his neighbor's appliances and listening to Phillies games on the radio. Reluctantly, Vinnie sat down with her and, for the first time, told his story. When she asked him how he had known what to listen for, he struggled to explain. "It's like when you know someone's in the room, even though you can't see them," he said. "Or when you can tell a machine's about to fail before it does. You just feel it. But it's not magic. It's patterns. Your brain recognizes something that doesn't fit. And if you pay attention, you can learn to trust it. When Holloway asked if he ever regretted not getting recognition, Vinnie shook his head. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because people were dying, and I thought I could help. That's enough. Vinnie Duca died in 1998 at the age of 75. His obituary in the Philadelphia Inquirer was 4 sentences long. It mentioned his Navy service and his 30 years at the Navy Yard. It didn't mention Convoy HX-237, or the 3 U-boats, or the technique that changed submarine warfare. But in a filing cabinet at the Naval War College, there's a folder marked ARA Program, 1943 to 1945. Clipped to the front is a handwritten note from Admiral Ingersoll, dated December 1943. It reads, "Some men see the war. Some men fight the war. And some men hear what others miss and save lives no one will ever count." CPO Duca is the latter. His contribution cannot be measured in medals, but in the ships that made it home. Years later, when the Navy developed the first computer-assisted sonar analysis and pattern recognition algorithms for modern submarine detection, their engineers studied the old ARA program files. They found that Vinnie's instinctive, auditory method was essentially the same complex process their advanced computers were now being programmed to perform. The human brain, it turned out, could do in real time what required millions of calculations for a machine. Vinnie had been a biological computer, processing data no one else even knew was there. He wasn't a warrior in the traditional sense, but in the cold, dark waters of the North Atlantic, the man who could hear submarines had saved lives no one would ever be able to count. His legacy was in the quiet, steady sound of the ships that made it home.